To me, I think that cultural competency is just being able and willing, not necessarily comfortable with, but willing to work with, learn about, or engage with different cultures. That means that you can work with a broad array of people, but you can also engage with that community of different people that may not look like you.
True cultural competency and acceptance also means recognizing that those cultural backgrounds may make people respond to conflict differently than you do. They may make people communicate differently than you do, and that might happen in ways that are sort of off-putting, and you can't negatively respond and immediately say, oh, well, this person's a poor communicator, or, oh, I don't like this person's approach to conflict, without understanding that there are so many more factors at play there.
The whole purpose of diversity is diverse thoughts and opinions, right? Like, it goes beyond race or religion. There's so much more to it.
It's not always super comfortable. It's not always super fun to think, I did it this way my entire life. I thought that's how everybody did it. Well, that's a strategy that works for you, and that's awesome. And there's also different strategies that work for different folks. And it doesn't make either of them wrong. It just means that we experience things differently.
People need to be aware that there isn't just one issue that somebody is facing or a certain group of people are facing. There's a lot of cultural groups that are continuing to face many issues.
As long as you're having those open, honest conversations, I think that we are able to move the needle a little more forward, because then they might be interested or curious, like, okay, well, what is outside of, the street that I live on or the town that I live in? And then they will start to come across people that look different from them, act different from them, eat different foods, and they might be more open to those things.
I feel like it's so many of us is like stay in what makes us comfortable, stay in a little bubble of what makes us comfortable. And I can relate to that, needing that comfort. I can understand that, but at the same time, you cannot get to experience so many other people from so many different points of views if you don't get to step out of that comfort zone.
Being able to understand the differences that each of us has and using that and being able to be spoken about those differences in uncomfortable situations, that is what diversity and inclusion is.
I really feel like that a single conversation can lead to a whole world of understanding.
We have these common stories that we know, but by creating more stories about and with people of color or people who identify as queer, you're creating more visibility, which creates more space, which creates more collaboration, which is what the goal needs to be, to create a healthy and diverse and open community as a whole.
It's easiest to just share your experience and just make yourself vulnerable. And when people see that it's a safe space, then they're willing to share their experiences as well.
The best way to become more inclusive is asking somebody about that, talking to somebody about their differences, and being willing to learn and educate yourself on somebody else's experiences, their culture.
That's what creates a functioning world. If we all thought the same, we wouldn't have all these great inventions and ideas, right?
Diversity is literally different experiences and different lives in general.
What led to us having different experiences? Was it purely our human control, or were there some societal impacts that were contributing to that?
We really will be the generation that's gonna want to learn more, and that'll push others to learn and push others to question their beliefs.
Simply says nothing else exists. All that exists is what I believe, what I see, and I don't have to accept anything else. I don't have to know that anything else exists, because all that I see is right in front of my face.
One of my very early experiences with white Americans was very negative. I was called racial slurs, and I was denigrated in a bus for speaking Spanish.
Here I had a student call me a racial slur. I never experienced anything racist at all, and that's when it really got real.
Denial is just to have privilege, because you don't feel the need to acknowledge your privilege, and so you think that what you know is what you need to know, and if it doesn't harm you, then there's no reason to go out of your way to learn about other cultures.
Denial is, at its base, refusing to accept that any work needs to be done.
Some people just don't want to learn. And when you have people like that, it's really hard to break that barrier and try to get them to understand.
I think there's a lot more conversation to be had when you don't polarize yourself or polarize the country.
My understanding of polarization is that folks are not able to look outside of their own worldview, and that things outside of their own worldview or their comfort zone can be really threatening, really terrifying, and therefore it doesn't exist. Their way is the right way, and everything else is incorrect.
The admittance of one's privilege is the first step, because I think without that, there's no need, there's no perception that there's almost anything wrong. Admitting that I have this privilege, and then also adding on to that other people don't, that other people have, varying degrees of inequities or disparities.
I think the first step is to say that this matters. This is something that will benefit you. And then people will finally start to see, well, if it benefits me, maybe I should at least give it the time of day.
Don't get angry when you hear something because you're like, that makes you uncomfortable. Just try to understand why it makes you uncomfortable. Why, hearing to all this talk about racism or xenophobia makes you uncomfortable.
I think it comes back to a lot, once again, the exposure to real people on the other side of those spectrums.
I personally feel like that most people who are in denial about other cultures is to just go into to experience them.
It's okay to be a little overwhelmed at first. It's okay to be frightened, to not understand things, and it's especially okay to need help. But you have to ask for it. You have to sit down and talk with someone and say, hey, I am trying to learn how I can better support you as a human being first, and then as every other identity that you hold and claim.
I really do not think it's equal as everybody says it is. It's not free, and everybody is not included. And so when people start to realize that, that's when the change starts to happen.
Just because you don't understand it or you don't see it, you haven't experienced it, doesn't mean that other people haven't.
Diversity benefits everyone involved. Diversity of ideas, mindsets, backgrounds, and experiences always help the group that is made up of those members. It makes them more efficient, it makes them problem solve better, and these are all empirically backed.
Oftentimes people are treated very differently, and minimizing really does just that. It minimizes someone's experience and makes the claim that they are not unique and that everyone has the same experience, and that's simply not true.
Everyone is not the same, and if you view that, then you are minimizing all of the differences that us, me, and other people as well have, and I don't think that's appropriate, especially in today's society.
You need to really understand the impact of minimization. Colorblindness on the surface sounds like a good idea, but if you don't see color, you can't see the problems.
I did experience color blindness where people didn't want to ever talk about me being an Indian American woman, that I was a brown-skinned girl. It makes an individual feel like they need to be something else compared to what they really are.
They think that they're being an ally for people of the minority population just by saying, I have a black friend, or I have a friend of different culture. I'm not racist. I see all people the same, but that's so problematic.
If you can't see color, you can't see the disproportional rate that people of color in poor communities are being incarcerated. You can't see the number of incidents of police brutality and just these mind-boggling things that happen disproportionately to people of color and poorer communities.
We treat people differently. That's a core component of how our society operates. And minimization says, no, we don't. It says, I know that differences do exist, but I don't treat anybody differently, and you shouldn't treat anybody differently. And that misses the mark, because the reality is that we do treat people differently.
As an immigrant, as a person of color, as a gay man, I have found many times allies just speaking over people, and so I feel like that's not the answer either. But listening is trying to understand, be empathetic, try to see where they're coming from.
Growing up, seeing what my very black father went through, and then also, having a white mom that had black kids, what she went through. I think part of it, I experienced it every day, and I wanted to do my part to try to make the world a better place. And again, make those around me feel loved, no matter what setting we're in, whether it was sports or in class or eating lunch.
Whenever someone is minimizing, or if you catch someone minimizing, or if you yourself have a minimizing thought, make sure you think about, I am minimizing a human being's experience. I'm not supporting them in any way. I'm not giving them the fulfillment, the push that they need in order to make it to the next day, because I am simply writing it off as not that big of a deal. And I think if we took that mindset, a lot less minimization would go on, and we'd probably help a lot more people.
Stories, hearing people out, understanding your own place in racism and systemic and institutional instances of racism, that's where you bridge the gap from denial to acceptance.
Acceptance, in a cultural sense, is when you have recognized and internalized that different cultural views, different cultural stances are not only something that exists, but are valid in their own sense and are not better or worse than your own cultural stances and views.
It does start with acceptance and really just asking questions. I'm having a conversation with someone from a different culture, or if they're a different gender identity than me, like I always tell them, I ask a lot of questions about topics, and if anything offends you, please tell me, and I'll try to reword it better.
Acceptance can be a really internally messy position, because in minimization, you're thinking, well, status quo is just fine. In acceptance, you're thinking, oh no, I've acted in ways that are not the way that I want to be acting. I've treated people differently. I have done things that would not be respectful to someone who's not able-bodied, thinking that I was helping them, and instead I was minimizing their entire existence, and I was taking away their autonomy.
I believe being an ally is being able to step out of those uncomfortable boundaries and speak up for people that can't speak up for themselves, or their voices are not as loudly heard as, a white person's voice might be heard.
As a white woman, I am definitely not impacted as significantly as my peers might be having those conversations, because they're not about me. And I think that especially allies can use that to help push those conversations forward, so that we're not putting this massive undue burden on others. And of course, you have to balance that with listening to and respecting the perspectives of others, and letting, especially people who are being actively harmed by those racist ideas, letting them lead those conversations.
Folks in adaptation oftentimes are going to be asking how they can go and show up and support someone. Now, where this is different than other stages is that in other stages, the focus tends to be on the self and on self-awareness, and oh my goodness, I am someone who is not black in a black space, and the feelings of anxiety and uncomfortability really kind of permeate, and it becomes self-centered at times.
I like the imagery of the seat at the table, but step further where it's like everybody is has a comfortable seat. You're not on the corner of the table with a bar stool from the kitchen, but everyone is wanted there and is accepted there, and that doesn't mean that everyone has to be fully known there. You can ask questions and still be in a place of learning and understanding, but anybody and everybody is welcome to that conversation.
Being able to say that I am proud to speak out about all of these different issues and things like that. It doesn't mean just having a friend of color. Being able to understand the differences that each of us has, and using that and being able to be spoken about those differences in uncomfortable situations, that is what diversity and inclusion is. developing that sense into your personal life, your work life, your any professional setting where these conversations might be extremely uncomfortable, but being able to do that makes you more inclusive. People from different cultural backgrounds, we can only say and do so much. But when the majority population, so white people, actually speak out about these things as well, you'll see a shift in everything.
It takes a lot of intentional work to want to become culturally competent. It takes a lot of work to become educated specifically on the uncomfortable topics because it is unfamiliar for a lot of people.
A lot of people have difficulty addressing their privilege, and they don't think that they have privilege. So understanding that, and then also a big part of it is understanding the implicit biases that we might have towards like certain groups, and becoming very self-aware of that is a really big key to it.
You're wanting them to become your community, not wanting them to become like you or like your peers or like society. So kind of taking all of those things or those elements of identity of each person, which takes time and vulnerability and openness, if you take those and you listen and you understand, you create an adaptive, culturally competent community, which then leads to more equitable and equal society.
Sometimes they use people of color as tokens for, meeting like a quota or things like that, having that one person of color within your organization and using them as a token to say that, we understand diversity and inclusion, we understand what it means to have different backgrounds represented. But in reality, if you're not actually sitting down and making that individual feel included and having those conversations with them, and then it's not actual inclusion.
I think the main thing is just a lack of competency in talking to people that do not identify with any of your communities or statuses. People don't understand how they're supposed to approach the situation or how they can talk to someone if they don't share any common ground. But we can always just learn from other people. We can see what's different and grow in that way. It doesn't always have to be about similarities.
Don't be afraid to ask a question. What you don't know, you don't know. I think it's just really important to continue to have discussions with those people and not be afraid of conflict, because conflict doesn't have to be bad. Differing opinions can be considered conflict.
I feel like we have a long ways to go. We're learning new things every day. For example, pronouns, like learning someone's pronouns and getting used to that is something that I feel like everyone's kind of learning right now. And the concept of pronouns is so new.
I was born with a genetic disorder called neurofibromatosis. For me, I'm very open about my genetic disorder, and I say just ask questions, and I will not coach him, but I will be like, hey, this is the correct term instead of this term.
Try to understand your place in privilege. It's like we all have privilege of some sort. I feel like thinking of people as independent entities, it's the first step, understanding that not everybody has to be like me. Not everybody has to think like me or act like me or be like me or speak like me or dress like me. And understanding that I don't have all the right answers.
I've been challenged with my thoughts and my thinking and my opinions. I've been corrected on some of them that have made me a better person and made me a stronger individual.
Particularly for white people, putting yourself in the situation to have uncomfortable conversations and really working on expanding our patience. I know it's not always fun to talk to people about something they said or did that was problematic, but it's an obligation that we have, and it's something that I'm trying to get better at.